What is one of the most damaging practices that parents engage in? Well, I know this one, and unfortunately, I know this one way too well because it's a mistake that I made. Stay tuned, and we're going to talk about that in today's episode.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back. I'm delighted that you are here, even though I kind of hate to admit this at the beginning of this podcast, but truth and honesty compels me to say this. One of the reasons that I am talking about this subject today is because it is something that I did not do well as a parent. You know, one of the reasons that I do all of the work that I do, the podcasting, the speaking, and the writing, is because I want to help other people succeed. And specifically in these three key areas to be spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart, and to raise our kids to be this as well and not have to figure all this out when they're in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And then sometimes the fact is, people never really figure this out. And there are some things by God's grace that I got right, and there are plenty of things I got wrong. And one of my prayers, however, is that everything in my life that God would redeem and use for his goodness and his glory. And that requires my cooperation. And a lot of times that requires my honesty and my humility to say, I'm going to talk about this not out of success, but out of failure. And so, what I'm going to talk about today is something that I learned the hard way. But you can use what I didn't do well at, and you can use that as in your role as a parent or a caregiver, an educator, or a mentor to young people. And you can learn from my mistakes. That's the best way to learn is to learn from other people's mistakes and not our own. So, what am I talking about? What's one of the most damaging practices that parents engage in? It's this it is being motivated by fear. Now, you may say, what? I'm not motivated by fear. I'm not one of those people who is all concerned about my kids and messing all kinds of things up. Now, that doesn't apply to me. Oh, hold on. I would have thought that about myself at one time, but over time and through growth, I came to recognize how much of my decisions were actually motivated by fear, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. And so I want you to stick with me and don't just think, oh, this doesn't apply to me. Think in terms of, hey, maybe I don't see myself as a fearful person, and you don't have to. I didn't see myself as a fearful person. Most people around me wouldn't have said, oh, that's Stephanie. She's just always filled with fear and everything. That is not the image. But one of the reasons that fear is so damaging is because it's so covert. It can come in such subtle forms and it does its damage because we never even know it's there. And I am very sorry to say that as a Christian, sometimes there's a lot of teaching that gets a Christian label slapped on it that really is fear based. And I would say isn't even biblically based, even though somebody has wrapped it up in Bible verses, but it's really based in fear. For example, here are some of the things that were being taught when I was raising my kids, and they sounded very scriptural, but they were really very fear based. They were things like this: if your kid doesn't obey immediately the first time you tell them something, then you are teaching them that it is okay to disobey God. Okay, that's kind of intimidating. If I don't make sure that my kid obeys the first time, As soon as I tell them something, I am setting themselves up to be rebellious against God. That's kind of a fear based way of parenting. But a lot of people bought into it, myself included. Now, what I've also seen happen is because this tends to be part of human nature is when there is the teaching in one area of life. And I don't even necessarily mean quote Christian teaching, which I think is different from true biblical teaching. But even if it comes in secular packaging, we have this tendency as humans for the pendulum to swing from one side to the other. It's like we have to overcorrect when we recognize something is wrong. I don't know that that's going around quite as much today. It seems that the pendulum has swung to the far other extreme, which is to say, if you have any kind of constraints on your child, you are going to crush their little spirits and they are not going to be able to grow up and to be themselves. Now, maybe you fall on one extreme or the other, and maybe you're kind of in the middle with that. You don't have to be at one extreme or the other, though, in order for fear to be a motivator. Now, I am a realist. I am not living in denial. I am well aware of all of the things that parents have to deal with today as they are raising their kids to know and to love God and to know that we live in a world and we live in a culture here in the United States where there is no longer the cultural scaffolding of Christianity. It's gone. And that doesn't make the work of parenting impossible, but it absolutely makes it harder. That's all the more reason to be mindful so that you don't use fear as a motivator in your life. See, there were a lot of things that people didn't have to use to intentionally teach because the culture around us taught it. There were expectations of behavior, of beliefs, of ways that you showed up in the world that were external. Well, now that's gone. And so what we have to do is to be even more intentional to integrate those teachings into our parenting and as we're raising kids, because now we have to make internal what used to be external. And we can do that with an empowerment mindset, not with a fearful one. Well, sometimes, in order to escape from fear, people go off into these other areas that don't work either. There's ignorance. It's just kind of like, well, if I just don't think about it, if I just don't really go there, if I just don't dwell on it, if I just don't make myself aware of certain things, well, then that's how I'm not going to be afraid. Uh, Good luck with that. See how well that turns out for your kids. May work for you as a parent. I guarantee it's not going to work for your kids as adults. Or there's denial. Now, denial's different than ignorance. Ignorance is I'm just not going to learn. And denial is I know, but I'm going to act like I don't. That doesn't work out well either. And then we have this thing specifically for us as Christians called presumption. And that is where we misuse faith and we call it faith, but it's not really faith, it's just presumption. It's just kind of like, well, if I'm well intentioned and if I mean well, and if I ask God, well, then He's going to make up for what I don't do or what I do wrong. And that's not faith, that's presuming on God. What are some of the things that fear causes us to do? How does it affect us as parents? Here are some things that you can be on the lookout for to say, do I have fear that's motivating me in some area or another? Because here's the thing, it's typically not a matter that fear is our only motivator and it's motivating us in every single area of life. But fear can be powerful in a very negative way, just if it's motivating us in one or two areas of life. So here's some things to look out for. Number one, do you find yourself wanting to just hide? Okay, I get it. If you have kids, there are times that we all just want to hide. Okay, I'm not talking about I've had it up to my eyeballs, I just need to go hide in the bathroom, or the car or the shopping mall or someplace else because I just need to get away from these people that I love so much, but they are driving me crazy. I'm not talking about that kind of hide. I'm talking about where we are wanting to hide from engaging in things, especially things that might create conflict. That's a big indicator that fear is at work in us. Another thing that we can do sometimes when we're really being motivated by fear is we just get loud. I mean, I don't just mean our voices get loud, although it can do that, but we get loud inside our heads and we might get loud with our mouths. But it's almost as if the volume gets turned up in our heads or in our mouths because we're trying to drown out fear. And the third thing that we can do that's motivated by fear is we threaten. Now, threatening is very different than disciplining. I'm not talking about extending a consequence. I'm not talking about saying, hey, kiddo, if you choose to throw those gummies across the room, then the consequence is going to be, and you fill in the blank with that. That's not threatening. That's saying, hey, life has choices, life has consequences. Choose your choices, choose your consequences. Here they are. But it's threatening, and it's not just threatening, and I'm not talking about threatening in a mean or abusive way. I'm talking about where we get into a mindset of threatening instead of giving choices and giving consequences. There's a very big difference between those. We can be very concerned and we can be very sorrowful for our children when we give them choices and they make poor choices and they suffer the consequences. But that's very different from these threats that just continue to go on and on and on and may escalate over and over and over again. Another tactic that we can resort to when we have fear motivating us is we want to run. Now, this is a little different from hiding. They're kind of similar, but they're a little bit different. We just want to get away from something. Hiding is where we want to get away more for a temporary period of time. But running is when we want to take action so that we can get away from something or someone permanently. And the last way that fear often shows up is it causes us to strike back or to strike out. We want to retaliate. Someone hurts us, we're going to hurt them back. Someone has scared us, we're going to scare them back. Someone has, we feel that they have refused our authority. Well, we are going to show them we are in charge because we're going to basically strike back. Some other ways that fear shows up is we can become pleasers. We can become people pleasers. We can become very good at appeasing so that we avoid conflict. And what's really driving it? It's fear. What happens if we don't appease this person and then this conflict? What's going to happen? What's my child going to do? How am I going to handle this? And we can become pleasers to that it seems like, oh, we're just being so kind and we're being so loving and we're being so caring. But in fact, we're being very motivated by fear of conflict. Another way that fear can show up is we can set very low expectations. Now, I don't know too many parents that are walking around saying I've just got such low expectations for my kids. Yeah, I just don't expect them to be much of anything like. I mean, we don't go around talking to each other like that. But the reality is, and again, this doesn't have to be in every single aspect of life. Maybe it's just in one or two areas. But where there have been very low expectations set because we're afraid. We're afraid of what it might call us to have to do if we set high expectations, because it might mean that, hey, it's going to take something more of us than what we really want to than what we want to commit to doing in order for that child to have higher expectations set on them. It can also mean that we set very low expectations because we're afraid we're going to be disappointed. We're afraid our kid's going to be disappointed. And so we just keep the bar low so that they don't have to experience disappointment. Another way that fear can motivate us is that we try to overprotect our children from the consequences of their choices or from the impact of the world in which we live. Now, there is a difference between wise and appropriately protecting our children and going overboard so that we are so fearful that we don't want them to experience any kind of pain or suffering or hurt or hardship. Good luck with that. And while that would seem to be good parenting, it's actually terrible parenting because the reality is life will teach our kids what we fail to teach them, and it will almost always come at a far higher cost than if we had taught them ourselves. If you find yourself in any area of life where you're hiding, you're getting loud, you're threatening, you're running away, you're striking back, you're appeasing, you're setting low expectations, you're overprotecting from the consequences of your child's choices or from the impact of the world in which we live, you might want to look and see if fear is at work. So, what's the antidote to fear? Now, you might be thinking, I'm going to say, oh, well, the answer to that is love. And okay, in a sense, that's true because we know the Bible verse that says perfect love casts out all fear. But I think that it's better to say for the purpose of this discussion, the antidote to fear is wisdom. You see, when we walk in alignment with truth and how we have been designed to live and how God has created this world, when we walk in wisdom and have understanding, that gives us power. It gives us not an entitlement mindset. That's the last thing we want. An empowerment mindset. It gives us a courage and a confidence, not because we can have guaranteed outcomes in the way that everything's going to turn out the way we want for ourselves or for our kids, but because we have a guaranteed confidence in the ultimate outcome that when we align ourselves, and that includes our parenting, with the way that God has established people and life to work, that God will ultimately set things right and honor that. Now, does that mean that he violates our children's free will? Absolutely not. But even with that, if we are so afraid that our children might make choices that will take them away from God, we can actually end up impacting and causing that more likely to happen if we parent out of fear. So again, we don't go to the other extreme and be presumptuous and think, well, that could never happen to us, because it absolutely can. But by using wisdom rather than fear, we can walk knowing that we've done everything possible to not contribute to poor choices that our children may make now or may make someday in the future. Again, I learned this lesson the hard way. So learn from my mistakes, and you don't have to make your own. Be courageous enough to examine and to ask God to reveal to you, are there places where you are being motivated by fear? And if so, then get smart. Get the wisdom that you need to know, okay, then how do I address this differently so I'm being motivated by wisdom and by courage and not by fear? All right, my friend, I'm so glad that you joined me today, and I look forward to you coming along next time. We'll pick up with next Tuesday's episode where we're going to be back in the book of Nehemiah, and then we'll be back next week with another Life's Key 3 that's focused on helping parents and caregivers and educators, next-gen influencers, And if you're a parent, you are absolutely a next gen influencer. Hey, if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for my weekly newsletter, High Impact. You can do that on my website, stephaniepresents.com. And remember this, you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.